Greetings and welcome to the third lesson in the Advanced Philosophy of Education course. Our first one, was ontology, and then we had axiology, and now we're into epistemology. Let me review a bit about an ontology, which was the study of being. What were we trying to do there? Do you remember? I have to rethink it a little bit. We were trying to figure out about the different type of learners, the different types of being, and we did come up with that continuum where you had on one hand you had rock, and then it moved to left or whatever way you want to go through animals, humans, angels, gods, almost to nothing. And because we're trying to figure out, what is he? How do we teach him? See, how does that teacher relate to him? What knowledge do you need for him? All right, that's what ontology did. Now let me take you over to axiology. Why did we get into that? Well, because this is about values. Because when you get into that one being, especially the human, he makes a lot of values. Animals do too, but they're very basic. And I suppose a rock does too have a value. Now, you say, well, we put it there. Yes, we do. But if you ask the rock, he'd say, yeah, here's what's important to me. I want to have a place to sit. Or the animal says, I want to have something to eat. But anyway, the main value maker, axiology, study of values, is the human. Now, we don't know about angels and gods. Remember, we said we don't know what their values are. We just impute them. But okay, so we studied this to find out about that teacher. And what is he doing here? He's got values he's making for those learners. He, along with the Department of Education, does this. He doesn't do it alone, although some teachers have quite a leeway. They can. So, okay, we reviewed and we studied this and we studied that. Now we're at the point where we say, okay, we know something about the learner. We know that type of being. We know a teacher. We know what type of being, and we know the value systems there, and we know here. Because we made values about primary values and secondary. Now there, let me just review that a minute. The primaries were, you have to have safety, you have to have food, you have to have rest. And the secondary ones were, I want a new suit, I like this shirt, I want to go to school, we need to teach you this. But now we're into, okay, knowledge, epistemology, study of episteme, knowledge. So we have to decide what do we want to set up here to pass on and put it in this curriculum in that school. So we have to think about 2 or 3 different things. You got to say, well, what do we want? Statements of fact? Do we want research? Do we want statements, beliefs? And then we say, okay, here's the curriculum we're going to put in that school, or we're going to put in front of that learner. Then you have to say, all right, teacher, this is what we consider knowledge, and we want this to be passed on to these learners. So he has to get, or she, they have to be aware of that, what the curriculum is, laid out well in a school, and then also in the methodologies. But we'll get into that later when we get into specific methodologies, specific role of the learner, and the curriculum. I'm right now trying to find out what of this knowledge that we've gained should be passed on. The first question I look at when I'm thinking of what knowledge do we need in that curriculum? Well, I put this one, basic curriculum for learners. And what is it? What I call before in ontology or values was primary values when we studied axiology. Okay, what are we talking about? Safety. We have to find out if we're going to make life better and we're going to accept life as a good thing that we should work on and improve. You have to take care of that. Safety. The safety of the individual, the safety of a nation, the safety of a society, of a culture, the safety of the animals that you have to eat down here for energy. There are many issues in that safety thing. And I suppose the first one is when you're thinking, well, I'm going to teach a little kid, you teach him about personal safety. Not self-defense, but that comes in there. But when he's crossing the street, when he's getting, on the ice, don't fall in the river. You might, if you can't swim, be careful if a car's coming. Get out of the way. Don't eat the wrong things. There are several things. But these, I don't think it's hard to argue against that. The safety is so important. Otherwise, you don't have the life. Okay, what would we do next? Energy. When you're teaching children and adults, hey, you have to have a certain amount of energy. So you have to eat. You have to take care of your health. You eat the right foods. You develop a diet. And the United Nations coming out with they had 37 food scientists study what would be the best diet for mankind to sustain itself. And it's quite an interesting thing. They decrease the amount of meat that they want you to eat, or recommend that you eat, even though they don't cut it out totally, but they have you a lot to do with plants and vegetables and things. But anyway, that would be another thing that you start with at the elementary level, even at the child level. 3 years old, you start talking about energy. You got to eat. Joe, you have to eat because you need energy. Why are you drinking all that pop? Let's have something that's nutritious. And especially in the school, because you at a certain age, we offer a health class, and you build health into the elementary curriculum, into the social studies, and in high school level, we used to have a health course that was just on that. Okay, next one, rest. Well, everybody rests. No, but you still have to get proper rest, otherwise it affects this. These things are, they're intertwined. So you say, well, you have to go to bed at 10 o'clock, Johnny. Well, there are some things that we're learning more about rest and sleep and that, but still that's the parent has to say, and the teacher has to talk about, you have to get proper rest, go to bed early, sleep in a quiet room, put the lights down. Although I know some people try to sleep in the daylight, and there's research to show that you don't rest as well, but you can't tell them. That's because I guess they don't believe it or something. But anyway, so these would be the things that should be in the curriculum, something that talks about, and we do, that's how schools are. I'm not criticizing schools here or any education program, because all of them do, but we're looking at this thing to say, all right, you're a new teacher. This is what, when I taught university, you talked about you were training teachers that hadn't taught yet. They're becoming teachers. And so you have to talk about these basic things, especially some of them are going into elementary and the lower elementary, but it permeates even through university. Some of them forget about this when they get there. But then the big issue of safety comes up. Self-defense. He's bullying. That became quite a safety issue. But all right, so primary values. We want our curriculum to look at these and take care of these and educate and have the learner so he becomes aware of all of this. The second topic or question I would come up with when we're looking at this curriculum is number 2 here, basic tools needed by the learners. Now, in the first one, we talked about the primary requirements, safety, health, and rest, but the little kid and even the older kid, he has to have some tools to learn about this, because you can talk to him in the first grade, well, yeah, he knows but he has to have some tools to keep on learning. He has to have some tools so that he becomes aware of how to take care of those primary values. And there'll be thousands of secondary values added to this curriculum and to life that he needs tools. Well, what are they? Reading. Well, writing and arithmetic. Then people say, what arithmetic? Well, that in here we talk about math, but let me go to reading, because so you're teaching a child in the first grade. You talk to him about these primary, you don't say primary values, but you're talking to him about safety and that. Then he reads, then where does he learn more? He reads the stories about Jane and Dick, or Tom and Harry, and and Beulah and Wilson. And they tell the stories about, well, he got down there by the river and he shouldn't have been. Well, reading helps enlighten this. It gives him a whole new approach to it, because he can go learn on his own about safety. And when he watches, I guess the TV, I'd get down. Well, that'd be part of this, because he reads on TV or he listens, because in that reading, it's the auditory as well as the visual. So, and then you say, well, where's the computer come in? You do a lot of reading on a computer. You see, if you're older and you're looking at how to solve some of these problems, or you want to know about the values that we've implemented, like there should be no poverty. So where do you go? You go to the computer. What do? You read. And then you communicate. Well, I'm not writing letters much anymore, but I'm writing on that computer. You're typing, and you have to be able to type so that you can communicate your message out. Well, then where's math come in here? Arithmetic. Well, mathematics is a tool to help you analyze and research things. When you're saying, okay, I have a hypothesis here that the more you eat, the more you weigh. Well, mathematics helps you put that into some way of communicating it. You can write about it and say, well, you do, but if I show you that 10 pounds you went to 20 pounds, I use this type of, I guess it would be a tool when I'm writing, and because it kind of enhances it. But anyway, so the old basic reading, writing, arithmetic is still around, and there's different ways to teach these things too. They had the phonics, and then they had the whole word thing, but I'll get into that later. But right now, these are the basic tools, and if the child, the early learner, doesn't get them, then it's troubles as he grows older. Well, okay, you can take it, you can say, well, I didn't know math when I was younger, but I can take it. But it's better to get that basic tool when you're down there in the lower level, the lower grades. So that becomes a very important part of this curriculum. To get in, first of all, you talk about those primary values. You don't get into the secondary values much. Then because you have to give him these things, the tools, so he can kind of go out on his own, because a school doesn't have enough time to teach a student, even in 12 years, of all the information, all the knowledge we have, all the statements made, all of the, you have hypotheses, you have theories, and you have statements about facts, which are about somebody did some study on matter and their interactions. But that would be number 2 I would put on there. The third question, and the final question I'll come up with in this lesson on epistemology, which is a part of philosophy of education, and this is the advanced course, back to the question. Number 3, understanding created values. Now remember, when we were talking about axiology, we talked about the primary ones, because that has a big influence on deciding what this is. And then we had the secondary or created values, I call them. And they influence what we're going to pass on. All right, so when you say, what do you mean created? Well, here's society. And everybody from 3 years old to who says he likes this pie and not that, he's created something there, to the leader of the United Nations saying, hey, that's not right over there. You're supposed to do it this way. Rules probably are number 1. It's slap everybody in the face, because even when you're a little kid, well, you can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. Well, all right, so what do we do here? What are we saving this? Well, what we are doing as teachers is trying to say, the reason we make rules is to make things a little easier and a little nicer so somebody doesn't get hurt. We want to protect those primary values, and we want to be able to do these other things to go to the movie. So we have a rule. You got to pay. You have to go at a certain time. And they're just statements of facts too. So everybody's influenced by these. So what is the teacher supposed to do? Make the rules? Well, they do make them. The school system makes the rule. It says you have to come to school. That's the state law, or the provincial law says you have to come to school. You have to be here when you're 6 years old and go when you're 12, unless you got some exceptions. But they make that rule, and a lot of kids don't like that rule. So what is the job of the teacher here? Well, the job of the teacher is to say, if you will go along with these rules, you'll be better off down the road. And that's always a constant thing of, hey, you're going to be rewarded later on. The kid says, I know, but I have to come here and I don't feel like sitting in that class. Well, all right, but you have to talk him saying, hey, there are some other benefits. Then this passes on to laws. As society gets so big, they have rules, but then you make laws for the country. And if you don't follow the law, here the rule, you get punished. Here you go to jail if you don't, or you get fined, because you have to have some order. You think, well, why does mankind just have order? Well, this is what you talk about. This is the knowledge you carry over into the curriculum. Even maybe not at the first grade level, but you get into it junior high and high school a lot about the laws. You got to pass the law, because I taught commercial law in high school, and the kids were constantly, well, can I do this or can I do that? And then we'd get into criminal law and civil law. Okay, so what's the teacher doing here? The teacher's trying to help that learner go along with these and understand why they're in place. Okay, what's the logic? These are all created values, because logic isn't just natural. Well, mankind said we have to have some way that we can say this is a statement of fact, or this sounds logical, because a guy comes up and says, I can fly. Well, what do you mean? Well, I just dive into the air. Well, that's not logical. It's kind of, you start saying, well, wait a minute here, you might need some other things. Goals. Why do we make goals? This becomes part of the curriculum and saying, well, you have to set goals or you'll never accomplish anything. And you encourage the child to do that. You encourage the high school. What are you going to be when you grow older? You're going to just grow up and be nothing? Oh, that's not good. Evidence. That becomes important for the student to know about what is evidence. It's that research that's been done that makes this thing look like, hey, this was the way it really is. This is the truth. Because if you don't have enough evidence, especially in courtrooms, you lose the game. There's no evidence to support your argument. Adjustments. Now, why did I throw that in there? Well, because you have to teach and help the child, and when I say child, I mean all the way through high school, to be able to adjust, because it won't go his way all the time. Yeah, I know. If he accepts all of these, there'll still be something in there he doesn't like, So you have to say, well, you have to be able to adjust, and that becomes part of this curriculum, teaching a child how to adjust. So when he says, well, I don't want to do that assignment, teacher, well, don't just say, well, you have to, or it's a rule, I'll punish you if you don't, you get an F. Well, you can do that, but I found it was better to say, well, why? We're trying to learn about this. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. Okay, cultures, and that's a big clash now. But we do have to study cultures, and you have to have that in the curriculum under I guess in high school it would be under social studies, or you could get it into health, you could get it into the political parts of it. Economics too. I taught economics in high school, and you got into the culture, because why do these people spend their money on that? Why don't they kill the cow and eat the cow? Some countries know a cow is sacred. Well, that became part of their culture, affected the economics. This is a big one, the belief that you got. And this, now, when you go as a teacher, you're not going to convince everybody, hey, I want you to respect cultures. I want you to know about them. If you don't respect them, you'll end up in a war. That's what these wars come out of. But anyway, back to belief. There's so many different religions, and you can fight them and you can deny them, but it would seem to me it ought to be part of the curriculum. It is in religious schools, but in a public school, they don't like you talking. But you talk a little about it anyway. These people believe that. They believe they have a God. These don't have that. I mean, you don't have to make any decisions about accept that one and not that one. And then in this one, and there's several others, but I just put a few up here. The purpose. You say, why are you doing this? Well, in that curriculum, you ought to talk about, and they do that in the science curriculum a lot. You're trying to invent something, or you're trying to discover something, and that becomes your purpose. Then you talk about the purpose of life. Well, they get into that, into the belief, when you got the religious thing. But what's the point of having a purpose? Do you need a purpose? What's the purpose of man? What's the purpose of this curriculum and this education? I guess this would be enough to go into, because there's several others, because all of the things. But all of these should be incorporated into that curriculum and come out in some class in some form or another. Okay, at this point, I think I've finished up. This is the third lesson. Epistemology is the third lesson in the course Philosophy of Education Advanced. And we'll leave it at that. And thank you very much for listening. And there'll be, if you want a certificate of participation, you take the test that I have included at the end. And it's based on these 3 lectures, or these 3 lessons. And if you do all right there, we will give you a certificate of participation. At least you'll have something to show that, hey, I got involved in that class. Okay, thank you very much then. Bye now.